and welcome viewers. I am Pia and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines this hour. US President Donald Trump has stated that Israel has agreed to the initial withdrawal line and that Hamas's agreement will trigger an immediate ceasefire and pave the way to return the hostages and prisoners. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has warned that the demilitarization of Gaza will happen either by Trump's plan or by Israeli military. This comes after Israel agreed to the initial withdrawal proposal. The activists detained by Israel from the global Sumud flotilla, who have now been released, have alleged severe mistreatment in Israeli custody, particularly with Swedish activist Greta Thunberg. Syria is holding its first parliamentary elections 10 months after rebel groups led by Ahmad al-Shara, the current president, overthrew Bashar al-Assad to end a brutal civil war. The election is not being held across the entire country, with provinces like Sweda, Raqqa and Hasaka excluded due to recent unrest. Billionaire Andrej Babis's populist ANO party has taken a commanding lead in the Czech Republic's parliamentary election but is on track to fall short of a majority. With ballots from more than 97% of polling stations counted, ANO has secured 35% of the vote, according to the Czech Statistical Office. Heavy rains have triggered landslides and flash floods, blocking roads and washing away bridges, killing at least 22 people in the last 36 hours in Nepal. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has stated that Pyongyang has allocated strategic assets to respond to the buildup of US military forces in South Korea. He's vowed to develop additional military measures as well. Blasts were heard around Gaza, with smoke plumes spotted in several places as American President Donald Trump urges Israel to scale back operations in the Palestinian territory. All right, viewers, those are the headlines and our top focus. What's happening in Europe? The governor of Lviv region of Ukraine, Maxim Kozitsky, has now stated that a Russian drone and missile strike on Ukraine's western Lviv region overnight killed 2 people. He's also added that 2 other people had been wounded. Meanwhile, at a late-night attack on Ukraine's southeastern city of Zaporizhia, 1 person has unfortunately lost their lives and 9 others are reported to be injured. Meanwhile, Poland, a NATO member, has stated that it scrambled aircrafts to ensure its air safety after Russia launched airstrikes on Ukraine. Ukraine, meanwhile, has reported that missiles and drones are raining down on the Lviv region near the Polish border. With us on the broadcast is Gilbert Dr. Rao, International Relations and Russian Affairs expert, joining us from Brussels. Thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us on NewsX. Civilians are now losing their lives. We'd seen yesterday as well, there was an attack on a train station that claimed the lives of 30 people. Apart from this, energy infrastructure is being targeted within Ukraine as well. And what do you think will be the consequences of this? Particularly with regards to energy security in the global market?
The Russian attacks on Lviv may not be understood properly by much of the audience who aren't necessarily experienced in the geography of Ukraine. So let me just say the obvious. This is next to the Polish border. And Lviv has been a marshalling point for incoming military hardware coming through Poland, because Poland is across the border, from the West, from the United States and elsewhere. They fly in or bring in by ship the armaments into Poland, which are then transported by rail down to the border and crossing over into the Lvov region. For that reason, because of the proximity to Poland and to avoid having an escalation and a sharply worsening relations with a NATO country like Poland, Russia in the past did not hit hard the Lviv region. They were spared. And that is paradoxical, because the whole problem in relations between Russia and Ukraine are from that region. The Lviv region is the home to the Ukrainian nationalists. That is to say, the Lviv region, which was various times over history, I mean recent history, going back 150 years, was in Polish, Austrian possession, and then became part of Ukraine after World War II. This area was a center for the Ukrainian language. It was propagated from the end of the 19th century by the Austrians, who supported the Ukrainian language and Ukrainian nationalism as a way of undermining the Russian Empire in that region. So the Lviv region has very great historical and present-day importance. Present day as a logistics center, present day as an intellectual or ideological center of the whole Maidan movement and the anti-Russian direction of the Ukrainian leadership in Kiev. That it is being struck in such a cruel way now is an escalation by the Russians in response to the never-ending escalation towards Russia by NATO and the United States.
Indeed, and speaking of NATO, so far we've seen their response has been very calibrated, even though Poland did scramble jets and Operation Eastern Sentry is in place. There's not been any major protraction of the war that has taken place. Is NATO now towing the line very carefully in order to avoid escalating the war even further?
I wouldn't say that. The war has many different dimensions. And NATO right now is escalating in a different area, but even more dangerously than what we see in the daily news coming from Lviv, for example. What I have in mind is the Baltic. The European nations, and with France in the lead, are now trying to impose both a maritime and an air blockade on Russia over the Baltic Sea. And that the arrest of what was assumed to be by France a Russian gray fleet oil carrier that Europe sanctions, the interception this past week by France, who arrested the captain and one of his mates and interrogated them for some time before releasing them, that is an act of war. It was done in neutral waters, and if Russia wanted to present Europe, France in particular, with a declaration of war, it would be under the UN Charter entitled to do that. So escalation is underway, but it's not where you're looking. Escalation is now in the Baltic.
All right, so I request you to stay on with us. We're tracking some further updates. Lithuania's Vilnius airport was forced to shut down late on the 4th of October. Now, according to reports, authorities spotted 13 suspected contraband balloons flying towards the airfield. The airspace remained closed until 4:30 a.m. local time. Now, flying objects were also seen near Baltoji Walk, just 25 kilometers from the border with Belarus. This comes amid growing concerns over repeated airspace violations across Europe. Unidentified drones have caused airport disruptions in Denmark, Germany, Norway and the Netherlands in recent weeks. Russia is increasingly suspected of being behind the incidents. In fact, just last month, Russian drones breached Polish and Romanian airspace, and on September 19th, 3 Russian jets entered Estonian territory. NATO officials, meantime, are on high alert. Still with us on the broadcast is Mr. Gilbert. Dr. Rao, interesting development. You referred to France. There was a meeting that had recently taken place in Copenhagen where French President Emmanuel Macron, he referred to the shadow fleet, but he also spoke a lot about the drones as well, stating that NATO will give a befitting reply and will shoot down any drones or any jets that are in fact breaching sovereign territory airspace as well. In light of this and the actions we've seen France taken recently, do you think other countries, other NATO nations will follow suit as well?
Only if Mr. Putin stops playing pussycat and shows himself to be a lion. His address last Thursday to the Valdai Discussion Club in Sochi indicated that Mr. Putin has lost his way and is inviting attacks like the one that you have mentioned by his softly approach in the face of brazen acts of escalation by NATO. There's hysteria now within Europe over the supposed violation of European NATO airspace by the Russians. This has two dimensions to it. That is the jet fighters that you mentioned in passing and the drones. All of this, let's be perfectly clear. This is programmatic. It is staged. I would bet money on it. Let's say a case of champagne with any of your listeners, that this is being staged by the MI6. The Brits are in charge of dirty tricks. This is very much an hysteria generated from London, the same way as the hysteria Russia against Mr. Trump in 2016 was facilitated by MI6 and the Steele dossier and all of that complete fabrication. The Russians did not send any drones against Poland. That is proven to anyone who is interested in facts by the nature of the drones, which were not attack drones, but were decoy drones, and which were very likely taken from downed Russian drones in Ukraine, reconstructed very easily, and sent towards Poland, towards Romania, and elsewhere by the Ukrainians for the sake of fomenting a war, a NATO-Russia war, which would relieve Ukraine from its present travails. So I know you make your efforts to be objective, but you have involuntarily, I would say, repeated the propaganda coming out of London when you say Russian drones attacked Poland. Nonsense.
And sir, quick follow-up to that. We've recently seen elections take place in the Czech Republic. Billionaire Andrej Babis's populist ANO party has now come to power. The EU is slightly wary of this, considering the fact that he is adopting a more protectionist position. We've recently, in fact, seen the EU approving a tranche, many tranche of aid to Ukraine, amounting to 140 billion euros. And this was in a discussion for quite a couple of years, but Hungary in particular was stalling. Are there now fears that the new government in the Czech Republic that has now come to power would follow in Hungary's footsteps?
I'm very pleased that you raised the question of Mr. Babis's evident victory in yesterday's elections in the Czech Republic. That is of great importance. It raises the number of EU member states who do not accept the decisions that Ursula von der Leyen and her team are forcing upon Europe with the support and help of NATO to do everything possible to escalate and continue the war. The 145 billion that you mentioned would continue the war for 3 more years. Now, what does that mean? It means that Europe would be looking to create a bridge, a continuing war in Ukraine, while it rearms and prepares for an all-out war with Russia 3 to 4 years from now. So this is a very important development. Mr. Babiš is against it, just as are his neighbors in what was called the Visegrad Four, the 3 members that are in agreement on the approach to Russia and the war in Ukraine are Mr. Orban in Hungary, Mr. Fico in the Slovak Republic, and now Mr. Babiš in the Czech Republic. That is very important. Poland is the odd man out in the Visegrad, but that may change.
All right, so I request you to stay on with us. We're tracking further updates coming in. We're now learning that Russian President Vladimir Putin has congratulated Tajikistan's leader Emomali Rahmon on his 73rd birthday and has emphasized upon the importance of their upcoming meeting in Dushanbe. Now, Putin has expressed confidence that the meeting would strengthen the already close Russia-Tajikistan partnership, focusing on expanding bilateral, regional and international ties. The leaders will discuss various key issues during their meeting, which will coincide with the second Central Asia-Russia Summit and the CIS Council of Heads of State. Putin is looking forward to constructive talks that will further enhance ties between the two nations and boost cooperation within the Commonwealth of Independent States. Still with us on the broadcast is Mr. Gilbert. Dr. Rao, of course, Central Asia being in focus at the moment. You had earlier pointed out that Europe in the long term is looking at rearming and preparing for another war. In the meantime, could we see Putin sort of shifting his strategic assets, sensitive assets further east as well in order to protect them? And what role does Central Asia have to play in this?
I wouldn't say that Mr. Putin is changing or pivoting towards Central Asia. I would say the question is how Central Asia pivots or does not towards Russia. The fact is that despite their common past in the community of independent states, which was a successive organization to the Soviet Union, all the countries of Central Asia blow hot and cold as respect relations with Russia. When it looked like Russia was not doing well in the war, they were all flirting with the United States, where Mr. Biden's administration was doing everything possible to win each of these countries away from the friendship and close ties with Russia and China. Then, when it became apparent that Russia is defeating NATO and is winning the war in Ukraine, they all suddenly thought again about their close friendship with Russia and drew close to them, which is what this latest news bulletin that you've given is all about. When Russia is winning, they're all good friends. When Russia doesn't look like it's winning, then they start looking for new romance partners in the United States and elsewhere.
Indeed, and we are seeing some rather interesting developments also take place in the Caucasus region as well. There are protests taking place in Georgia at the moment against the results of municipal elections there. In fact, the protesters are contesting the fact that the government is pro-Russia.
I wouldn't say it's pro-Russia, it's pro-Georgia. And that is what outsiders, particularly in the United States, have not liked at all. The Georgian administration was, in the last 5 years, never friendly to Russia. For a long time, they canceled direct flights between Tbilisi and Moscow. The trade relations were minimal. So the notion that Georgian leadership was divided between the friends of Russia and the friends of the United States is a false presentation. The country was divided between the friends of Georgia and the enemies of Georgia. The enemies of Georgia, who were out in the streets demonstrating and who probably got their pay packets each day from the Soros funds of one kind or another. Formerly, they received them from US aid. They are there to overthrow the legitimately elected government of Georgia, which is pro-Georgian. It does not want to be drawn into the war with Russia as Mr. Saakashvili was when he was in power in Georgia and almost cost his nation its existence in 2008. So they want just to be left alone to look after their commercial and geopolitical interests.
All right, so with that, I would like to thank you for taking out time, sharing your insights with us on NewsX World today. With that, viewers, we're shifting focus towards the Middle East, where we're now learning that the Israeli military has stated that a ballistic missile was launched by the Houthis in Yemen towards Israel this morning. The missile was intercepted by Israeli air defenses, setting off sirens in central Israel, southern West Bank settlements and communities near the Dead Sea at around 5 a.m. this morning. As the sirens sounded, thousands of Israelis rushed to bomb shelters. The Israeli Defense Forces announced that the missile had been destroyed and there were no reports of damage or injuries from the attack. Meanwhile, Houthis and Israeli Defense Forces have continued attacks and counterattacks against each other since the beginning of this conflict. This is a significant development as it comes after Hamas's agreement to release Israeli hostages while seeking some changes in the peace plan that has been proposed by Donald Trump. There were 3 to 4 points against which they raised their contention. With us on the broadcast is Matty Zweig, geopolitical expert. Thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us on NewsX World. Now, after Donald Trump's ultimatum, Hamas has expressed willingness to release all Israeli hostages, and negotiations will be taking place in Cairo. The U.S. Special Envoy will be there as well. How do you view this development? Is this a genuine breakthrough?
Well, thank you for having me. this time is more serious than the other times. But let's not forget that for Hamas is has completely loosened their grip on most of the areas in the Gaza Strip. They have been defeated until now in about 80% of the army capabilities. And now they are playing with this until the last moment. Israel already with all the double pain, the pain of not completely defeating Hamas and the pain of redeployment in the forces inside the Gaza Strip and the possibilities of having more conflicts in the future, they say, yes, we want, first of all, to have all our hostages back at home, and we are ready to sign this. The Hamas side, they say, okay, we are ready to free the hostages, but we are still here. We are still in power. We don't dismantle our military capabilities, and we are going to be, even if not in a future government, but our presence is going to be part of the Gaza Strip. And this is something that nobody accepts, not the US, not Europe, not the moderate Arab countries, and of course not Israel. So they have to find some kind of formula to get over this gap between the two sides. And maybe in the next days, we are going to listen about a breakthrough. But again, let's not forget that for them, hostages are the last card they have in hand. And they think that maybe in a future agreement, if they are not going really to behave, Israel, knowing that the hostages are not inside Gaza Strip, maybe are going to take some military responses like they did after their agreement with Hezbollah every time they break the agreement.
And so in the meantime, Hamas has not agreed to disarm. And in this context, what are the risks if a ceasefire is in place and Hamas retains even part of its weapons stockpile or tunnel infrastructure?
The problem is not the weapons, because again, I'm maybe going to extrapolate again with Hezbollah in Lebanon. Hezbollah in Lebanon, they still have not the hundreds, they have dozens of thousands of missiles in some place with very few possibilities to launch them, and knowing that every little break of the agreement is going to be responded by Israel, even with Israeli initiatives and not only waiting for their shooting. So they think it's going to be the same in Gaza, and they are right in thinking that, because Israel is not going to permit, never in the future, to make possible to this genocidal jihadist group to plan another 7th of October. So this is the biggest danger for all the parts. But I think, you know, sometimes the ceasefire or the agreements, they have their force of their own and their dynamics, because after you start with them, people get used to have a tranquil life and to reconstruct your life. So not so easy, they are going to start doing what they did in the past. So in this moment, if this really going to happen, Israelis are going to be very happy about this development, despite all the dangers. And let's see what they do in the ground.
Indeed, and my last and final question to you. Hamas, in the meantime, has agreed to hand over administrative powers in Gaza to a technocratic Palestinian body. However, only once a national consensus is achieved. Now, at the same time, their statement has excluded any reference to the board of peace that has been proposed in Donald Trump's 20-point plan. In your assessment, then, is this an attempt by Hamas to retain control behind the scenes while avoiding external oversight?
Well, it really doesn't matter what they think at this point. What matters is what is done, the facts on the ground. And what they talk is the way they talk, like they usually talk for their people, for the people that are still afraid of this group that is also their own people, keeping under, let's say, state terror. because they were in power in the Gaza Strip and they were keeping the population in terror, excluding, of course, all the people that collaborate with them, that there were also a lot of civilians. So now things are going to change. This so-called technocratic government is not going to be a technocratic government 100% that they pass from the West Bank to Gaza Strip. It's going to be including also international actors. I don't know if from the US, but from the UN, from UK, and so on. So it's going to be a different reality, and Israel is going to have 1,000 eyes on every of their movement. But of course, if they are not going to give up their main weapons, things are not going to change, and they are going to commit suicide together with, unfortunately, our hostages.
All right, sir. Thank you so much for taking out time, sharing your perspective with us on NewsX World. With that, viewers, we're shifting focus towards Syria. Syria is holding its first parliamentary election since the fall of the Bashar al-Assad regime amid concerns over inclusivity and successive delays. Now, there will be no direct vote for the People's Assembly, which will be responsible for legislation during this transitional period. Instead, electoral colleges will select representatives for 2/3 of the 210 seats, and the rest will be appointed by interim President Ahmed al-Sharaa. Now, the polls are being overseen by the Higher Committee for the Syrian People's Assembly elections, whose 11 members were chosen by al-Sharaa in June. The number of seats allocated in each of 60 districts is based on census data collected in 2010, which is the year before the country descended into a civil war that killed more than 600,000 people and displaced another 12 million. Listen in to what some of the voters have had to say.
ماني متأملة شيء. ما عندي أمل بشيء خالص. ولا شيء. بتمنى يصير شيء يعني هيك للأفضل، بتمنى أنا كشخص بتمنى إنه يصير شيء للأفضل، بس ما عندي أمل بشيء. ولا أي شيء. ما بعرف، مو حاسة إنه رح يصير شيء جديد يعني يقدمنا لقدام يعني للأيام اللي جاية تكون أفضل من اللي راحت. بتمنى هذا الشيء يصير، بس ما بعرف.
أول انتخابات بيخوضوها السوريين في سوريا الآن بعد سقوط بشار الأسد، نتمنى تصير إن شاء الله عز وجل نحو الأفضل بإذن الله عز وجل، من خلال النزاهة راح تكون إن شاء الله عز وجل، ومن خلال الأشخاص اللي راح يكونوا إن شاء الله عز وجل كفوا لسوريا كلها وليس فقط لمدينة حلب. الأمر الثاني نتمنى يكون تمهيد لانتخابات المجلس الشعب القادم إن شاء الله عز وجل من خلال مشاركة الشعب السوري بالكامل، من خلال التصويت ومن خلال الترشح إن شاء الله عز وجل.
Shifting focus to Nepal, heavy rains in Nepal have triggered landslides and flash floods, killing at least 22 people in the last 36 hours. Now, 18 deaths occurred in separate landslides in the Ilam district near the Indian border, while 3 people were killed by lightning strikes in southern Nepal and 1 person died in floods in Udaipur. 11 others remain missing and rescue efforts are ongoing. Several highways have been blocked, stranding hundreds of passengers, and domestic flights have been disrupted as well. The Koshi River, which causes annual floods in India, is flowing above danger levels, heightening concerns in southeastern Nepal. Well, viewers, this is all we have for now. More news and updates on the other side. Stay tuned on NewsX World.